My brother laughed when I said I worked with computers. He didn't know my keystrokes had redirected cruise missiles over the South China Sea. He stood there, Greg, in the center of his meticulously manicured lawn, a monument to suburban achievement. His polo shirt collar was popped, a style affectation I was certain he'd copied from a college kid, believing it projected youthful vigor. It did not. It projected a desperate clinging to a time and status that were rapidly receding in the rearview mirror of his life. He held a flute of champagne, the expensive kind, and used it as a pointer, a scepter to command the attention of the assembled family and neighbors at his annual summer barbecue. "Diane," he announced, his voice carrying the practice boom of an HOA president laying down the law about lawn ornamentation. "She's finally retired from her big, important government job. 30 years of data entry?" He looked to the small crowd for confirmation, a performer seeking his applause. A few of his sycophantic neighbors chuckled on cue. "So, Diane, what are you doing with all your free time? Finally going to try and figure out how to hack Facebook?" The laughter was polite, but it still landed like a spray of small, sharp stones against my skin. I didn't flinch. I brought the plastic cup of lukewarm lemonade to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The taste was artificial, overly sweet, the flavor of forced conviviality. Around me, the air was thick with the smell of chlorine from the pool, the sizzle of overpriced sausages on the grill, and the cloying scent of my sister-in-law's perfume. It was the atmosphere of civilian life, of problems that could be solved with a sternly worded email or a new riding mower. I watched my brother. I saw the slight tremor in the hand holding the champagne, the tightness around his eyes that his easy smile couldn't quite conceal. His success was a house of cards built on a foundation of perceived superiority. He needed me to be the quiet, unsuccessful younger sister, the drab little sparrow against which he could appear as a magnificent peacock. It was the role I had been assigned in our family's private play for decades, and for decades I had played it without complaint. Silence was my trade, after all. My mind, a place he could never visit, drifted from the scent of cut grass to the sterile recycled air of a SIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, tucked 5 stories beneath the Maryland bedrock. The only smell there was the faint tang of ozone from the server racks and the bitter aroma of coffee that had been on the burner for 12 hours. The only sound was the constant, high-pitched hum of the cooling fans, a white noise that had become the soundtrack to my life. I could feel the phantom ache in my lower back from the government issue chair I'd occupied for thousands of hours, my eyes burning from staring at strings of alphanumeric code that were, to me, as clear and eloquent as poetry. Greg saw a woman who couldn't navigate a social media platform. The institution I served saw a woman who could dismantle a hostile nation's command and control infrastructure with a few hundred lines of proprietary code. The disconnect was a chasm so wide I could have hidden a carrier strike group inside it. "No, Gregory," I said, my voice quiet, just loud enough to cut through the fading chuckles. "I think I'll stick to my garden." He beamed, his victory complete. "That's my sister, down to earth." He patted me on the shoulder, a gesture of both affection and dismissal. He then turned back to his audience, the crisis of his sister's utter and complete boringness averted, and launched into a story about his latest battle with the city over recycling bin placement. I let my gaze drift over the party. My mother sat in a shaded lawn chair, her face a carefully neutral mask. She'd learned long ago that keeping the peace between her children meant never truly seeing either of them. My father was by the grill with the other men, laughing too loudly at a joke. He'd wanted sons to take over his hardware business. He got Greg, who sold it to a big box chain the moment he inherited it, and he got me, a daughter who disappeared into a world of secrets he couldn't fathom and therefore chose to ignore. They loved me, I suppose, in their way, but they didn't know me. To know me would have required an entirely different level of security clearance. This performance, this ritual humiliation, wasn't new. It was a tradition as ingrained as Thanksgiving turkey or 4th of July fireworks. Its roots went deep, back to a cold November afternoon in my parents' living room. I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in mathematics and linguistics that my father had called a waste of a good mind that could have gone into accounting. I had just accepted the offer. It wasn't flashy. It was a GS7 position with the Department of Defense. The offer letter was bland, the language deliberately obtuse. I sat on the floral sofa, the same one my mother still had, and told them. My father had lowered his newspaper, the reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, lending him an air of judicial authority. The government? What are you going to do, Diane? Be a secretary for some pencil pusher in Washington? Greg, home from his first year at business school, had snorted from the armchair where he was lounging. A G-man or a G-woman, I guess? He smirked. Probably just making copies and fetching coffee for the real agents. You should have just gotten your teaching certificate like Mom wanted. The air in the room grew thick with their disappointment. It wasn't hostile, it was worse. It was a gentle, suffocating pity. They saw my choice not as the beginning of a vital career, but as a failure to launch, a retreat into the faceless, gray anonymity of the federal bureaucracy. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, the primal urge to defend myself, to explain the battery of tests I'd passed, the interviews that felt more like interrogations, the hint of the profound importance of the work I was about to begin. But I saw the look in Greg's eyes. He wasn't just teasing, he was defining the narrative. He was establishing my place in the family hierarchy, the unambitious one, the one who settled. And I saw my parents accepting it because it was easier than confronting a reality they didn't understand. In that moment, a cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. I would not explain. I would not justify. I would not beg for their approval or understanding. My life, my real life, would be a closed book. Their opinion would be based on the cover, and I would have to be content with that. I sealed the door to my own world and handed them the key to a broom closet, letting them believe it was the whole house. It's a good opportunity, I had said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. Stable work. Stable, my father had repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He folded his newspaper with a sharp crack of finality. Well, don't expect to set the world on fire. He had no idea. The fires I would be tasked with setting, and more often putting out, were the kind you never read about in the papers. The intervening 30 years had been a masterclass in living a double life. For the family, I was quiet Aunt Diane, the one who always brought a sensible Jell-O salad to potlucks, who never married, who drove a sensible rusting Subaru, and lived in a small, tidy house that smelled of lemon polish and old books. I was reliable, predictable, and profoundly uninteresting. I missed holidays for work conferences in Bethesda that were actually deployments to listening posts in undisclosed locations. I took sick days that were spent in soundproof rooms, debriefing assets, or analyzing intercepts that made the blood run cold. Greg's life, meanwhile, was a billboard. Every promotion, every new car, every family vacation to Aruba was broadcast on social media with an air of breathless self-congratulation. His children went to expensive private schools. His wife chaired charity galas. He built a life of gleaming surfaces, and he polished them daily for all to see. He measured worth in square footage, horsepower, and country club memberships. My worth was measured in other ways, in the number of threats neutralized, in the terabytes of encrypted data I'd cracked, in the lives of soldiers and agents who came home because my team and I had seen the ambush coming. My trophies weren't displayed on a mantelpiece. They were buried in classified after-action reports, stamped with red ink. My bonus checks didn't go toward a new BMW. They were often just a quiet nod from a four-star general in a secure elevator and the immense, crushing, and deeply satisfying weight of knowing what I had prevented. The isolation was the hardest part. The burden of knowledge is a heavy one. I've sat at Christmas dinners listening to arguments about tax policy while knowing about a credible threat to the entire global banking system that my team was working around the clock to dismantle. I've listened to Greg complain about a delayed flight to his vacation home in Florida while my mind was on a downed drone in the Strait of Hormuz, and the pilot's family who didn't even know he was in danger yet. The two worlds could never touch. They were immiscible, like oil and water. My purse held the artifacts of this schism. A tube of lipstick and a packet of tissues lay next to a small, heavy challenge coin given to me by the director of the NSA himself. It felt cool and solid in my palm, its weight a constant reminder. To anyone else, it was a piece of junk, a curiosity. To those who knew, its presence signaled a level of access and authority that would make Greg's HOA presidency look like a child's game of make-believe. Back at the party, Greg had moved on from municipal politics and was now holding court about his son, Kevin, who had just been accepted into a prestigious MBA program. "He's a chip off the old block," Greg said, puffing out his chest. "He understands you have to be aggressive, you have to make your own luck, not like some people who are content to just float along." His eyes flicked to me, a casual drive-by insult. I felt a familiar tightening in my solar plexus. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was a cold, clinical weariness. I analyzed his words, his posture, his micro-expressions. He was a system, and his primary function was self-aggrandizement. His tactics were simple: identify a perceived weakness in another, amplify it, and use it to elevate his own position. It was a primitive sort of psychological warfare, and frankly, not very effective against a target who refused to engage. But today felt different. He was more insistent, his barbs sharper. Perhaps my retirement had unsettled him. My predictable role as the disappointing government worker was ending, and in its place was a vacuum. He needed to redefine me one last time, to cement my legacy of mediocrity in the family annals before I could escape it. He walked over to me, a predatory glint in his eye. He was bringing in his audience, the neighbors and cousins, circling them like sheepdogs. "You know," he said, leaning in conspiratorially but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Diane always acts so mysterious about what she did for 30 years. All that national security talk." He made air quotes with his fingers. "I have a theory. I think she pretends it was all very James Bond, but really, she was just in charge of making sure the toner cartridges got replaced." A wave of laughter, louder this time. I looked past him at the perfectly aligned rose bushes bordering the patio. I cataloged them by color: crimson, blush, canary yellow, a grounding technique. I had used it once during an interrogation in a windowless room in Afghanistan. It worked just as well here. He wasn't done. He saw my silence not as strength, but as acquiescence. He mistook control for surrender. "Come on, Diane. Tell everyone." He put his arm around my shoulder. His hand felt heavy, proprietary. "What's the most exciting thing you ever did? Find a typo in a memo? Unjam the big photocopier on the third floor? We're dying to know." This was it, the accusation climax. He was pointing the finger, not with malice, but with a deep, patronizing pity that was infinitely more insulting. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My father suddenly found something fascinating to look at on the bottom of his shoe. They were all complicit witnesses to this slow, methodical dismantling of my dignity. And I just stood there, holding my cup of lemonade, the quiet spinster aunt, the family failure. I offered him nothing. My face was a placid lake, hiding the unfathomable depths beneath. It was then that the world shifted. It began not with a bang, but with a sound that did not belong. A low, resonant thrum that vibrated up through the soles of my sensible shoes. It was the sound of powerful, precision-tuned engines, not the whine of a civilian minivan or the roar of a contractor's pickup. I knew that sound. It was the sound of consequence. Heads turned. The party chatter faltered and died. Sweeping beams of headlights cut across the cul-de-sac, illuminating Greg's prize-winning hydrangeas in a stark, unnatural glare. 3 black Chevrolet Tahoes, their windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness, rolled to a silent stop in front of the house, forming a perfect, intimidating echelon. They blocked the entire street. The doors opened in unison. Men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged. They wore earpieces, and their eyes, hidden behind sunglasses, were constantly moving, scanning, assessing. They moved with a liquid grace that was utterly alien to this world of paunchy, middle-aged men in cargo shorts. They created a perimeter, their very presence transforming Greg's manicured lawn into a secured zone. Greg's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. "What in the world?" he stammered, looking around as if the HOA statutes had a provision for this. The rear door of the lead Tahoe opened. A woman stepped out. She was tall, her silver hair cut in a severe, elegant style. She wore the crisp, dark blue service dress uniform of a United States Navy Admiral, her shoulders adorned with 4 silver stars. Medals and ribbons covered her left breast, a silent, glittering testament to a life of command and service. She was the physical embodiment of authority, power, and gravitas. I knew her, of course, Admiral Catherine Whitmore, Commander U.S. Cyber Command, my boss's boss's boss. Her eyes, the color of chipped steel, scanned the bewildered crowd of partygoers, dismissing them as irrelevant scenery. Her gaze found me and locked. Without acknowledging anyone else, she began walking across the lawn, flanked by 2 of the dark-suited agents. Her polished black shoes barely seemed to disturb the blades of grass. The party guests parted before her like the Red Sea. She came to a halt a precise 3 feet in front of me. The air crackled with a tension no one but me understood. "Dr. Holloway," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried the unmistakable weight of command. The title doctor hung in the air, a foreign object in this domestic landscape. I saw the flicker of confusion on Greg's face. My doctorate was in cryptology and symbolic logic, another part of my life I'd never bothered to share. "Admiral," I replied, my own voice steady. "SIGINT flagged a breach on the Oracle platform," she said, her voice low but clear in the profound silence. There was no preamble, no small talk. The world of suburban barbecues had ceased to exist. We were in a different reality now. "It's a Philidor-class cipher. We can't lock them out. We need your cipher key, now." My hand went to my purse. I bypassed the lipstick, the reading glasses on their beaded chain, the packet of mints. My fingers closed around the cool, milled edges of the challenge coin. I pulled it out. It was heavy, made of bronze, with the seal of the National Security Agency on one side and a complex series of nested, interlocking symbols on the other. To the uninitiated, it was a trinket. To Admiral Whitmore, it was my identity, my authority, my key. It was a totem that confirmed I was who I said I was and that I held the clearance to solve a problem that could bring the nation to its knees. I placed it in her outstretched hand. She examined it for a moment, turning it over. Her thumb traced one of the symbols. It was the one I had designed myself. She nodded, her expression grim but satisfied, and handed it back to me. And then it happened. Admiral Catherine Whitmore, a four-star flag officer in the United States Navy, a woman who commanded fleets and advised presidents, straightened her back to a ramrod posture. Her movements were sharp, economical, perfect. She raised her right hand, fingers straight and together, thumb tucked, and brought it to the brim of her combination cover in a crisp, flawless salute. She held it, her steel gray eyes locked on mine. "The nation is in your debt, ma'am," she said. The word ma'am was a sonic boom in the quiet cul-de-sac. It was a formal address of respect from a superior in rank and station to a subordinate who, in this specific critical context, held all the power. It was a complete and total inversion of the visible hierarchy. An admiral, in full uniform, saluting a quiet woman in a floral sundress and comfortable shoes. Behind me, there was a sharp crash. I glanced over my shoulder. Greg's champagne flute lay shattered on the flagstone patio, a splash of golden liquid and glittering shards of glass spreading like a stain. His face was pale, his mouth slightly agape. The popped collar now seemed to be choking him. All the certainty, all the smug superiority had been wiped away, leaving behind a profound and terrifying confusion. He was looking at me, but for the first time in his life, he was seeing a stranger. I turned my attention back to the Admiral. I gave her a short, almost imperceptible nod. The salute was dropped as sharply as it was rendered. "I'll need a secure terminal and a pot of coffee, black," I said quietly. "We have a mobile command unit ready for you at Andrews, Doctor," she replied. "Anything you need?" I looked at my family, at the stunned faces of the neighbors. My mother looked like she was about to faint. My father was staring at the Admiral's stars as if trying to solve an impossible math problem. Greg just stood there, frozen amidst the wreckage of his world view. "I have to go," I said to no one in particular. "Something's come up at work." It was the most brutally understated sentence of my life. I turned and walked with the Admiral toward the waiting Tahoe. The agents fell into formation around us, a silent protective bubble. One of them opened the rear door for me, and I slid onto the cool leather seat. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me off from that world and returning me to my own. As the motorcade began to move, pulling away from the curb with a silent, powerful grace, I allowed myself one last look back. Greg was still standing on his patio, a small, diminished figure in his own perfect kingdom. His world was governed by property lines, social status, and the rules of the homeowners association. My world was governed by secrets, by threats that moved like ghosts through fiber optic cables, and by the silent, solemn duty to stand on a wall he didn't even know existed. A small, bitter laugh escaped my lips. He had spent his entire life trying to make me feel small. In the end, all it took was one salute to show him how small he truly was. But the satisfaction was fleeting and shallow. The quiet triumph I felt wasn't for his humiliation. It was for the work. It was for the affirmation, not from my family, but from my tribe. My worth was not something to be debated over barbecue and cheap lemonade. It was encoded in the trust of the nation I served. My identity wasn't Aunt Diane or Greg's quiet sister. My name is Dr. Diane Holloway, and I had a cipher to break. The rest was just noise.